Welcome to the FarmBits podcast.
FarmBits is proudly produced by the Nebraska Digital Agriculture Team and hosted by students at the University of Nebraska.
The FarmBits podcast comes to you each week to discuss the trends, the realities, and the value of digital agriculture.
Through interviews with experts, producers, and innovators from across the agriculture industry, we hope that you step away from each episode with new practical knowledge of digital agriculture technology.
Hello, FarmBits followers, and welcome to another episode of the FarmBits podcast. I'm José Cesario Pinto.
And I'm Kelsey Swantek, and we're glad to have you with us today as we dive into the topic of enhancing accuracy and yield estimations.
On this episode, we welcome Dr. Dutton, CEO of Prescient Weather, the creators of CropProphet, based out of State College, Pennsylvania.
Jan talks to us about innovative grain yield and production forecasting for quantifying weather impacts to predict crop yield.
CropProphet has been helping commodity traders by delivering powerful capabilities to benefit trading and agribusiness by minimizing crop price risk and maximizing trading opportunities.
With that in mind, let's dive right into learning about CropProphet with Jan.
Please tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to be a part of the CropProphet.
Sure. So my background is I have a doctorate in meteorology, and I also did an MBA at the same time. And so I have been in the private sector, the weather industry private sector, since I graduated from graduate school. So I've been in the sector for 21 years. And basically, I've always been part of a private weather information company of one kind or another, generally with an entrepreneurial spirit. And so the founders of Prescient Weather, so Prescient Weather is the company that creates CropProphet. The founders of Prescient Weather and we were all at a weather risk startup in the late 2000s, prior to the last economic downturn. And so the four of us were at this startup, and when the economic downturn happened, the venture capitalists pulled the funding from the company. And I actually went off to DTN and worked there for 8 years. And the three other folks, interestingly enough, one is my father, went off and created Prescient Weather. And so Prescient Weather was in existence from 2009. And then in 2017, I ended up leaving DTN, and the time was right to join with Prescient Weather to help them grow. And so the point is that my three colleagues have been part of Prescient Weather since 2009, and I ended up joining in 2018 when I joined. And so I do and head up all the sales and marketing for the product as well, for CropProphet and for Prescient Weather.
So you mentioned both CropProphet and Prescient Weather. Can you talk a little bit more about what relationship those two companies have with one another?
Sure. So Prescient Weather is really just the legal entity by which the company operates. And then we create two primary products. One is CropProphet, which is what we'll be talking about today, the corn and soybean yield forecasting system. And then the other is the World Climate Service, which is it's an online tool set to enable commodity meteorologists, meaning agriculture commodities and energy commodities, to improve their long-range forecasting. So we operate the company as Prescient Weather, and we then operate what I call destination brand products, which is CropProphet as a brand and the World Climate Service as a brand.
Just a brief overview of CropProphet and what its actual product offerings are.
Sure. So first and foremost, CropProphet is it's a website or a portal that you can log into, and you get access to corn, soybean, and winter wheat yield and production forecasts that are updated on a daily basis during the season. And then it also provides really a wealth of weather information around what has happened over the past, say, 7, 14, 30, 60, 90, 180, 270 days. And then also forecast information around, and all focused on the crop growing regions of the United States. And then we also have Brazil and Argentina as well. And so part of what we try to do, I'll say, given our background and just our nature, we try to quantify information. And so the idea would be, we know that in the agriculture trading market lots of people look at, say, a colored map of temperatures over the United States, but it's up to that user then to figure out what that actually means for the corn crop. And so the interesting thing is, one type of weather in June has a different impact on the crop than the same weather that might occur in late July, let's say. And so the user has to not only sort of in their mind integrate spatially all of the data, all of the temperature, the precip data, the heat index data. They also have to remember like how much corn is grown in every county that matters. And so we try to do things like provide crop production weighted weather indices. So we can tell you, for example, that it rained 107% of normal across the Corn Belt over the last 2 weeks because we're calculating these crop production weighting indices. So we're trying to quantify the information and make it simpler to interpret the weather information. And then in addition to that, the website includes, we actually do a weekly commentary during the core of the season. Because to some, the yield modeling is a bit of a black box. And so we're trying to provide some context to how that black box is performing or why it's doing what it's doing. And basically we're trying to provide some visibility into the box so that people understand a little bit of what's going on. And then finally, we think that the performance of the product is important. So we provide information around the historical performance of our corn yield forecasts. And that then gets to another element of the product. So what I just described is a website that people log into. We also provide data feeds. And so if I go to the other end of the spectrum, part of our modeling involves being able to forecast prior years. So in 40 years of data, you can pick, say, the 10th year of data. You can train your model on the 1st through the 9th, and then the 11th through the 40th year of data and forecast that 10th year. And you can do that for every year in the data set. And so which is to say we have statistical tools that allow us to forecast prior years, as well as we have a history of the forecast that we've created since 2014. And so part of the offering then is a data feed that, say, a quantitative agriculture commodity trader could use to try to build algorithms to understand better how to trade the crop. A user might be able to use it to understand how the model performs in certain situations like a drought or heavy precipitation situations or something like that. So the product includes a website, and then it also includes data feeds that have different variations in an effort to try to sort of maximally meet the needs of the agriculture trading community.
A big part of this is actually weather information. And you guys are not just logging on to weather.com and pulling the 10-day forecast from the Weather Channel, right?
Correct. Yeah. In fact, so I mentioned there's 3 founders of the company, myself, and then 2 other people. So 4 of us, including myself, have PhDs in meteorology. So we're doing all of call it the brute force computation ourselves. So we're sourcing the original model data, we're adding value to it. We're also we're sourcing the original the weather observational data and post-processing it. And so really what we're doing is we're creating intellectual property, if you will. We're creating intellectual property around weather and climate information, along with the crop information, to come up with a sophisticated end of season crop yield forecast. That's
really interesting. And we realized that on the website from you guys talk about machine learning and in a few different times. And could you explain a little bit exactly what does that mean for your product?
Yeah, so let me say that for CropProphet, primarily what we're trying to do is we're trying to extract as much predictability for different crops, in this case, corn, soybeans, and winter wheat, using weather information. So the idea is that year-to-year variations in yield, and I'll say, and I'm going to focus on yield, but year-to-year variations in yield are due primarily to 2 things. One is the technology trend, and then the other is the weather conditions. And so the technology trend is kind of exactly what it sounds like. It is all of the technology that goes into producing more crop from one year to the next. So it's the seed technology, machine technology, fertilizer technology, chemical technology, just farming practice knowledge, the list goes on, that enables the agriculture community from one year to the next to grow more crop. And so if you look at the yield charts, the yield of corn, for example, over the last 50 years slopes up and to the right. And so the slope of that line is the technology trend. So if you remove the technology trend, what you have left then is variations that go up and down year to year. Those variations, for the most part, are caused by weather conditions. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to predict that yield by isolating the impact of weather on the crop and then using available weather information to model and predict what the end of season crop yield is going to be. So the way machine learning plays into it is, as an example, we have, let's just say, 40 years of county level USDA provided crop yield and crop production data. And we have the planting data and the acreage data and things like that. And so we use machine learning basically to build the model that we can relate 40 years of daily county level weather data to 40 years of USDA crop yield data. And so by doing that, it becomes a machine learning process, because in our training process, we test many models to try to find the optimal solution. And we can test different years to try to find, or to try to arrive at what we believe is the best model. And so it's a machine learning process in the sense that we iterate over many different models, many different counties to end up with a national yield forecast.
Yes. So you mentioned about all this data that the website generates and everything, which is really cool. But what types of insights that would have like to help these customers on decision making, for example?
Sure. So the primary insight that we produce is the end of season yield or the end of season production. And I will say it is really important that our users understand that we are forecasting the end of season yield. And so the USDA update, when the government's not closed, the USDA updates their yield forecast in January, and then they update it again. The county data is released in February. So we're trying to forecast what the USDA says corn, soybeans yield were during the season when they release it in January. Now, that being said, I mean, there is a lot of information available, and we know that our customers are trying to trade at a higher frequency, sometimes intraday, sometimes daily information. And we do know customers are using, say, the trends in our corn yield forecast to try to get a jump on the market, if you will, and understand the direction the market is likely to go. In addition to that, we also are providing, as I mentioned, weather forecast information. So there's a really interesting phenomena that occurs, that the price of corn and soybeans in the core of the summer change based on the weather forecast. And so in weather forecasting, there's a 0Z run, which is to say at midnight UTC time, the modeling centers around the world run their models, and a few hours later, a forecast is available. And then when traders show up in the morning, they're looking at that model information, and sometimes it'll move the market. And then in particular, the National Weather Service runs a 12Z model, which is, so again, that's 12Z UTC time, but it generally becomes available right around 11 a.m. Central Time. And so, 12 noon Central Time, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. And because it's available during trading hours, that model can move the market as well. So for example, one of the insights that we produce, because we've quantified the impact that weather has on crops, we can translate the weather forecast into a crop yield number. So we can say, based on this weather forecast that was just released, the model suggests that corn yield will go down by 1 bushel per acre over the next 15 days based on this forecast. And the reason we do that is what I said before, that this model is released, people are interpreting maps. Sometimes they get it right, sometimes they get it wrong. And we're trying to quantify what the impact of that model is to provide more granular data around the impact of the weather forecast. So for example, one of the things that we do is we started this year it's a 12Z email. So as we get the 12Z data as fast as we can, and then we run it through our yield model, and we send out an email that says the 12Z model suggests this much corn yield change or soybean yield change based on the current forecast. And again, that's we don't think it makes the end of season yield forecast more accurate. What we think is that it quantifies the impact of the weather information for the trading community, and provides more certainty around what the potential impacts are to the intraday prices, is the idea.
That's really impressive.
Yeah.
But yeah, you mentioned that these emails generated with all the information and sent for your customers. Could you describe what's the profile of your customers? If are large companies, traders, or even individual growers?
Sure. Our ideal customer is a sophisticated hedge fund that is doing quantitative trading, because we can provide data and information really that no one else can, because of the history of forecasts that we're able to provide. So we're able to provide as much as 35 years of corn yield forecast information. So that's the ideal customer. We have a range of customers, though, from hedge funds. Some of the very large grain trading companies are our customers. Some of the smaller proprietary and or algorithmic trading shops are our customers. And then we have quite a bit of interest from the agricultural risk management providers as well. So those are the folks that make a business out of advising the producers when basically to sell their crop. I will say that we get a lot of interest from producers, but in the end, producers they end up not being customers, and in part because we sell a premium product at a premium price, and it turns out that producers basically are not willing to pay the type of prices that we charge for the service. And part of that, I'll say, it works well. As I mentioned, we're a relatively small company, and it would be difficult for us to support the scale that would be required to make a business out of supporting the producers as a focus. Yeah, so it's really, broadly speaking, anyone that trades corn or soybean or wheat could be a customer. And in the end, it tends to be the larger customers that have fairly sophisticated proprietary trading operations.
So you have a few different subscription options available on your website. Can you talk to us a little about I think there was 3 of them, right?
Yeah, there's
the 3 different ones, and what the benefit is to each, as well as what those benefits actually do for the customers.
Sure. So we actually have CropProphet Premier, which is it would be the entry-level product. And what that provides is access to the yield forecasts, and then access to basic weather information. And by basic, I mean we have information on what has happened in prior months, and then we have a sort of a month-to-date update on things like temperature and precipitation, growing degree days, solar radiation, and things like that. The idea there is it creates an opportunity for someone to learn more about the product, to learn more about CropProphet, to sort of become part of the CropProphet network, if you will, and decide if they are interested in the next level of product. That next level of product is called CropProphet Enterprise. So CropProphet Enterprise includes access to the yield forecast that I mentioned, but it also includes then the weather model impacted yield forecast information. It also includes much more granular data on what has happened with weather conditions in terms of what has happened over the past, say, 7, 14, 30 days, and so on. And then it also includes access to visualizations of the weather forecast model for both NOAA's Global Ensemble Forecast System and the European model. And so in that case, then it is both, it's things like just the weather forecast in map format, but also our crop production weighted information as well. And then in that enterprise, you also get access to that commentary as well. And you also get access to an email that is emailed out every morning that is an update of the forecast and how it changed from the prior day. And then you can go a step further, and really that's when we get into what we call CropProphet Modeler. And so CropProphet Modeler is this idea of enabling deep analysis and or algorithm building for systematic or quantitative traders. And it is pretty much all of the data that we could provide and have access to. And that allows you to either trust our own model, but we also provide all of the data that we use to build the model. And so an organization could do their own modeling if they wanted to, based off of that modeler data feed.
Yeah. Could you explain or expand a little bit more how does this model works in the back end? What parameters does it account for?
Sure. So I guess back to earlier in the conversation, the first step that we do is we try to estimate what the technology trend is, and then we try to control for that technology trend. And that's just in effect processing USDA data. And then we maintain basically a database of weather observations and weather forecasts. And so the weather observations are the variables that you would expect, things like temperature and precipitation, and then some variables maybe you wouldn't expect, like soil moisture estimates and solar radiation estimates. And then we have different derivations from those from that weather data. So for example, part of the model includes a heat stress index where the purpose is to try to estimate what the impact of heat stress is on the crop during the season when days are very, very warm. So we have a database, think of it, of weather data. And then we also are regularly sourcing the USDA data. And so basically the crop data is updated essentially once per year in terms of yield and production, but we are sourcing the USDA crop progress and crop condition data as well. And so that data is updated on a weekly basis. And so, to some degree, the CropProphet product is it's a giant data science effort because we're managing different data sets that are from different locations. We're centralizing them in our data management facility. And then from that, we're doing different analyses to create different products from it. And so I'll say one thing that happens in the off season is we rebuild the model. So the idea is in January, in a couple of months, the USDA is going to release a new set of data, and we have to rebuild it and retrain our models. And so this data infrastructure that we have in place allows us to do that relatively quickly and relatively efficiently.
So you mentioned that you get a lot of your information from the USDA reports. What impact do those reports actually have on the predictions that you guys create through CropProphet?
Yeah. Sure. So CropProphet, the yield forecast, it turns out, is actually two models. One is a pure weather-based model, and the other is what we call a crop health model. So there's a crop condition-based model. It's crop condition plus NDVI data. So as the USDA crop condition reports come in during the season, we're using that to update a component of the model. And then the final product that is released to customers is an intelligent weighting of the purely weather-driven model and the crop condition model.
Yeah, and you mentioned that like having all this data that you guys collected or even got from USDA, what are the main challenges that you guys face for forecasting the crop yield and the production?
One challenge for sure is when events occur that haven't occurred in prior history. And so a great example is the derecho from last year. And right, so that derecho was so impactful and so widespread that there was no precedent in history for it. Right, so you can't build a model when you have a sample size of one. That is the problem. Like a challenge with something like a derecho is it's so infrequent. They're so infrequent. Derechos that large and that impactful are so infrequent that it's really, really difficult to model on. So there's that type of problem. That being said, I will say that we try to learn every year from what happens. And so an example is in 2019, right? It was really wet or around the corn and soybean growing regions during when planting normally would have occurred. And so the planting ended up being quite late. And as a result, the crop didn't have the opportunity to experience as many growing degree days, and the yields were negatively impacted. So as a result of sort of that event, we we improved the model by adding an early season planting date estimator, if you will, that improves the skill of the model in the event of a late planting. I'll also say we haven't talked about it yet, but we also are providing yield forecasts for Brazil and Argentina, and so that is a challenge because there's just not as much data available in places outside the United States. And so, like for Brazil, one of our challenges is knowing when the crop is planted. So one of the benefits, again, of the USDA data is we know when the crop is planting from the planting progress data. But in Brazil, we don't have information on, well, there's not widely available information on when the crop is actually planted. So it makes it difficult, for instance, when to start measuring degree days. Right, and so you have to end up doing it based on your best estimate, and so that ends up being a little bit difficult as well. I'll also say that particularly with international, you end up getting some data that you just can't be correct, and so you have to do pretty substantial quality control. But again, that's part of the challenge, and it's part of if it were easy, everyone would be doing it, and it's part of the value that we end up providing.
You mentioned Brazil and Argentina, and then China is another big one. Does CropProphet also provide information that helps decision-making related to those other countries, just in the ag market, not even necessarily the predictions?
Well, the short answer is no, in the sense that what I like to tell folks is that the price of a given crop on any given day is it's the balance of supply and demand, which is to say it's the balance of the market perception of supply and the balance of the market perception of demand. And what I like to say is we're providing input into the supply side of a balance sheet, of a crop balance sheet. And in particular, we're providing it for the United States, for Argentina and Brazil. For things like China, right? China is interesting because China impacts both the demand and the supply side, and can have pretty dramatic impacts on it as well. So we do have, we've had requests for sure, and we have plans to try to provide data more on a global basis. But as I just mentioned, finding the appropriate data for doing the same techniques internationally is really, really difficult. And so we're thinking through how we might be able to do that now. So I'll just say, like for corn, we actually don't get asked about China that often. The next most frequently requested location after Brazil, Argentina, and the United States is Ukraine, because of its impact on European markets. And then we get asked a lot about Black Sea wheat estimates, and then Europe in general.
Okay. And we talked a lot about the forecasting, the predictions of this crop yield and productions, but what does this information enable it? Like, could you quantify a financial impact for the customers that might have?
Sure. So I kind of just mentioned it, which is that we're providing forecasts of the supply side of a balance sheet, and I guess the challenge for an end user is that, as I just mentioned, price is the balance of supply and demand. So our users are trying to estimate the supply side, or the supply number for the crops that we model. And then from that, they're using that information basically to try to either hedge price risks, or speculate on the direction of the price of a crop at any given time. I will say that the quantification of it is basically whether or not the information helps the user estimate the correct direction of the price. And if they can, so for instance, if you're using it to hedge price, let me think about this. If you're using it to mitigate the risk of a price increase, because let's say you're buying corn because you're going to make a product from it, then the quantification of it is an estimate of the price advantage you were given times the volume of the crop that you buy. And it's pretty straightforward from that perspective. From a trading perspective, it's literally the number of contracts, times the price movement that the trade informed, or that the information informed. So the ROI component of it is pretty straightforward. However, everyone is different and make decisions in their own context. That makes it difficult for me to spit out a number directly.
So in ag, just in general, sustainability is one of those buzzwords that we hear a lot, and that's what a lot of people are worried about in the ag industry. Does CropProphet play a role in sustainability at all, do you think?
So again, the short answer is not really. And I say that only because, as I mentioned, we're a small company and we're trying to stay super focused and make sure that we can generate as much success as possible where we're focused. And that focus is really around crop trading, or I should say agricultural commodity trading. I will say on my own, I've wondered about the degree to which the regenerative farming certainly has a weather dependency on it. And I have spent a little bit of time thinking about the degree to which the information that we provide might be able to help at a high level understand the potential benefits of regenerative farming from year to year. Which is to say, like, again, I would imagine that for example, carbon sequestration in the soils must change in dry years than versus wet years, just based on the performance of the crop. But again, right now, our mission is to provide the best possible crop yield forecast for the purpose of commodity trading. And we haven't yet thought about the opportunities associated with sustainability.
That's pretty interesting. Yeah. So what does the future of CropProphet look like? Do you have any plans or goals down the road?
Well, I mentioned one of them, which is we over time want to provide valuable information for additional geographies, some of which I've already mentioned. And certainly that's a fairly major effort, but it is something that our customers are asking for. We also plan to add crops, right? And so we get asked pretty frequently, do you model this crop? Do you model that crop? And we're certainly keeping a list of those, and over time we'll be expanding it. I guess I'll say that the impact of weather on crops is never going to disappear. So there'll always be an opportunity to provide value through helping to quantify the role that weather has on crop yield and crop production. And as much as possible, we try to listen to our customers and respond to what they are asking for. And the challenge is balancing the needs of the customers with basically the available time and resources we have to implement new capabilities. But I'd say the answer is certainly go global and provide information for additional crops.
Where can our listeners go to learn more if they're interested in CropProphet or if more questions arise?
Sure. The best place is our website, CropProphet.com. And then we also have a fairly active Twitter feed as well, which is @CropProphet. And so the CropProphet.com provides more information about the product and the different features. And then on @CropProphet on Twitter, we basically tweet out information from the product to try to keep folks a little bit updated and really to demonstrate the type of content that's available in the product.
Awesome, yeah. And I guess this is our last question here. Do you have any advice or words of knowledge for those listeners that might be wanting to use some of these tools to better improve marketing decisions?
Yeah, I guess I would say that the reality is that weather and weather information, it's a complicated game. So our little company, we process hundreds and hundreds of terabytes of data a year to create the two products that we create. And, my experience is there's a lot of people that think they can do it on their own. And there's probably a lot of people that can. But I would also say that, whether it's CropProphet or any of the other products that are available to provide weather information in the marketplace, I would say don't be afraid, certainly, or to take a look at them, because there's pretty valuable information contained in them, especially as the culmination of meteorological technology, data science technology, computing technology are really creating some pretty fascinating opportunities for value-added products. And so I think, we're just at the start of what's possible. And years from now, there'll be, the products are obviously going to be even better than they are now. But now would be a great time to start looking at them.
Thank you very much to Ian for taking the time to join this episode of the FarmBits podcast.
It's really exciting to see the possibilities that combining weather and crop models creates in the agriculture industry. One of my favorite parts of this episode was learning how CropProphet is utilizing crop reports from the USDA and using their own weather models to predict yields.
I also think the way they produce their insights for their customers is really valuable for the ag industry.
I hope you enjoyed this episode, and we look forward to sharing another digital ag story with you next week on FarmBits.
Thank you for taking the time to join us on the FarmBits podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts to be informed about the latest content each week.
We welcome your feedback, so if you have comments or questions for us, please reach out to us over email, on Twitter, or in the reviews section of your favorite podcast platform. Our contact information can be found in the show notes.
We would like to thank Nebraska Extension for their support of this podcast and their commitment to providing high-quality informational material to members of the agricultural community in Nebraska and beyond.
The opinions expressed by the hosts and guests on this podcast are solely their own and do not reflect the views of Nebraska Extension or the University of Nebraska.
We look forward to you joining us next week for another episode of FarmBits.